Hey, how are you? My name is Felt, and welcome back to Destiny 2, a game that I do in fact still play, even if I don't constantly make videos on it. Today we're just going to be talking about a build that I've been toying around with, perfecting, and having a lot of fun with over the past few weeks in my off-stream, offline playing of Destiny 2. It is my unkillable, quote-unquote, stasis build that is actually the build I'm going to be taking into the new reprised raid that's coming out in probably about a week after this video goes out. So you too can have time to make this build for yourself. I'm going to be going through everything related to the subclass. I'm going to be going over the weapons I use for it, and I'm going to be going over the armor and armor modding, as well as exotics that I'm going to use for it. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so let's start by talking about the subclass and all of the stuff we're going to use. First and foremost, we're going to be talking about the aspects, because the aspects put all of my other choices into, essentially, logical sense. First and foremost, the required aspect for this build, the one that cannot be changed no matter what you do if you want to use this build, is Grim Harvest. Now, why do you use Grim Harvest? Because you make stasis shards, and stasis shards are the cornerstone of this build. Being able to make stasis shards when you defeat slowed or frozen combatants is really, really powerful, and it basically puts the rest of the build into perspective as to why you're using what you're using. The other aspect, for me, is non-negotiable, but I've heard people have success if they change it up, but it's non-negotiable for me, and it is Touch of Winter. Because of the fact that for your Glacier, Duskfill, and Cold Snap grenades having better functionality, as per the description there, the most important part is that your Duskfill grenade has a bigger field and a small stasis crystal in the middle, which can be used for shattering, to just do massive AoE damage to really help you just keep crowd control under control. I 100% believe that you should always be using Touch of Winter in this build. However, you could probably make use of Winter's Shroud, because the slow ability does synergize very well with Grim Harvest. But the 2 fragment slots in Touch of Winter is way too powerful for me to pass up. Let's talk about the fragments. Now, the fragments are super important to this build. Usually they're very important to your builds anyways, but however, in the case of this build, you basically have 4 fragments that you are essentially required to include to make this build get off the ground properly. And if you're not using them, this build does not function as it should. Now, first and foremost, something that makes this into the unkillable build is Whispers of Rime. Now, what does Whispers of Rime actually do? Collecting stasis shards, see what I mean? Shards are required. Collecting stasis shards grant a small amount of overshield, which falls off after 10 seconds. Collecting additional shards add to the overshield and refreshes the timer. So essentially, as you collect shards, you gain overshield. Your overshield gets refreshed as you pick up new shards, and shards are just generally good for you for various reasons. Now, something that isn't immediately apparent when reading this is how this actually functions in-game. Where this functions in-game is that if you take damage, you're missing your shields. If you pick up a stasis shard, it tries to give you an overshield, but it can't. So it just gives you your shield back. So picking up a stasis shard essentially immediately heals you because of Whispers of Rime. It is incredibly powerful, and it's highly, highly recommended as just a stasis fragment in general, but specifically for this build, it takes you from being pretty strong and tanky to being essentially unkillable. Now, next in line, Whisper of Chains here. This one, it's straightforward. It does what it says on the tin. While you and your frozen targets or a friendly stasis crystal, you take reduced damage. That's just good. You're probably going to be in the thick of things quite often if you're trying to freeze the world. Your teammates, if any of them are running stasis crystals of their own, will be helping you make this work better. It's just a very powerful thing that makes you very, very, very tanky. The next in line is Whispers of Durance. I'm going in order of importance, by the way. I'm just going to clarify that now that I've gotten to the third one. Good job, me. But Whispers of Durance is the third most important just because it improves your slows. Your build is slow-based. You're trying to throw out as many slows as possible to trigger your Grim Harvest to make shards. So something that makes your slows better is really, really, really powerful. So yeah, Whispers of Durance, that's next in line. Afterwards is Whisper of Shards. Now this one might seem a little odd, because it says shattering a stasis crystal. And hunters don't really make a ton of stasis crystals the way that, like, the other classes do. Like Titan, for example, constantly makes stasis crystals. And stasis crystals aren't things that slow. However, You recall back to when I was talking about Touch of Winter, your Dusk Field has a stasis crystal in it. Throw your Dusk Field, immediately shatter that crystal, and you're refunding it towards the next one immediately. It is a lot better than I think a lot of people realize on Hunter. And on top of that, it does give you 10 free resilience, and that's pretty hard to pass up. Now, the final one here, which is the one that I'd say, if you really don't want to use the enhanced grenades thing, this is probably the one you should drop. It just makes nearby stasis shards track to your position. I personally think this is invaluable for the build, because it basically means that anytime you're slowing anything, you are constantly getting healed and topped up. I think that's incredibly powerful. I think 10 resilience and 10 intellect is hard to pass up as well for stat distribution. I mean, look at the stats I can get on this build. 10, 10, 5, 5, 10. That is a lot of stats, and that is essentially because all of these really powerful things come with stat boosters. So personally, I still recommend using Touch of Winter and Whispers of Conduction. However, if you're going to drop Touch of Winter for Winter's Shroud, for example, or if you're insane and you just really, really, really want Shadow Dive, just drop Whispers of Conduction. You'll be losing 20 total stat points. However, this is probably the best one for you to drop, but it's still invaluable in making those healing shards track to your location. And let's really quickly just go through the abilities and why I use what I use. First and foremost, let's talk about the grenade. I've brought it up a lot. Use Dusk Fields, please. Just use Dusk Fields. Especially if you're using Touch of Winter and your Dusk Field now has a stasis crystal inside of it, just use your freaking Dusk Field. Just use it. It's so strong. Dusk Fields are amazing. Giant AoE slow that will freeze stuff pretty quickly if you have your enhanced slows on from Whisper of Durance. A stasis crystal that you can shatter to give yourself better grenade recharge is just so good. The other ones are fine. You could probably make good use of Glacier Grenade. You can probably make okay use of Cold Snap, but Dusk Field is just where it's at. Withering Blades, obviously you have to use it. You don't really have a choice, but like, it's good. Jumps, I mean, personal preference, but everyone I know uses triple jump because it is the correct jump. Yell about how wrong I am about that in the comments or something. Dodge, non-spicy take. Gambler's Dodge is the superior dodge. Spicy take, if you use Marksman Dodge with this build, you're trolling. You want as many slows as possible. Gambler's Dodge gives you back more throwing slows. Simple. That's it. Plain and simple. You want more slows, you get slows that you throw. Use Gambler's Dodge. Just do it. Okay, let's talk exotics. Now, we're gonna go and have some real depressing hours talk here. And we're gonna talk about how I used to use this build when these exotics released. Before it got brutally murdered by doubling the cooldown. Talking about Renewal Grasps in case the fact that they're on the screen didn't give it away. Renewal Grasps are insane. It makes your Dusk Fields even bigger, and it turns it to a full-size Stasis Crystal if you're using the aspect that boosts your grenades. So it can just be a really solid, large Stasis Crystal with a really big, damaging explosion. And on top of that, you get damage reduction inside of the field. Sounds amazing. The problem is, this exotic got nerfed really heavily, essentially doubling the cooldown of your grenade when you have it equipped. While it is very good and very powerful, even running 100 discipline, your grenade cooldown feels like it's taking ages. If you can deal with that, if you think the Renewal Grasps are worth a squeeze, if you think that they're still that powerful, like I personally almost do, use Renewal Grasps with this build as your exotic of choice. It's very powerful. Better Dusk Fields are great. You'll just have less of them than if you just didn't use them at all. Now, as for the exotic that I actually use, in case it wasn't obvious, the one that I have equipped here is the Mask of Bacchus. Bacchus is by far and away probably your best option for any stasis build on Hunter. It is just raw damage boosting, and while it does make you dodge less often, adding essentially 10 seconds of not being able to dodge, adding 10 seconds to your dodge cooldown, it's still very, very powerful. And if you don't know the full description of how Bacchus works here, so it replaces your stasis dodge with a longer range, faster moving shift, making you basically harder to hit as you hit it, giving you more safety to disengage by using the dodge. After shifting, your arc weapons deal increased damage. You also deal increased damage to all slow to frozen combatants. Those are two separate things that are wrapped into the same buff, meaning that your arc weapons deal more damage, and on top of that, you deal more damage to slowed and frozen stuff, meaning that arc weapons are getting a double boost. That'll come back around when we get into the weapons later. The bottom line is Mask of Bacchus is essentially you dodge, you get a 10-second damage boost. It's great for it's great for DPS phases on boss fights. It's great for just clearing out majors and ultras throughout the course of a raid or strike or a GM or whatever. And if nothing else, it's a great get out of jail free card because you dodge and you're teleporting halfway across the map, being very, very hard to hit while you do it. It's a good exotic. It's one of the best options we have for stasis right now. If you have your own neutral game exotics that you like to use, like let's go through our collections here and see what neutral game exotics Hunter have. They're kind of few and far between. But for example, if you're a real believer in Foe Tracer, Foe Tracer would work just fine with this build. If you're a huge believer in Sealed Ahamkara Grasps because you like that free reload, please go ahead and use them. If you are a Dragon's Shadow believer, someone who loves having their weapons reloaded and handling and reload speed buffed, please go ahead and use that. All of those are great options for this build. However, I personally value Bacchus highly because it's just massive damage boost, and as someone who tries to take this build into endgame content a lot, damage boosting is king when you're doing contest mode or Grandmaster level content. Being able to just kill stuff faster is invaluable. Highly recommend Bacchus, but there are other great options out there. Okay, so let's talk about armor now. And I don't mean like armor choices, armor stats, or anything like that. First of all, let's just talk about armor modding for this build. Armor modding is very important for this build. There's really only a handful of things that I hyper recommend, but the thing that literally cannot be done without is elemental shards. You're absolutely insane if you're using a build that makes a ton of stasis shards and has them all tracked to your position, and you're not using elemental shards. Giving you free ability cooldown for basically no reason whatsoever is kind of busted and cool. And you combine that with something like, oh, I don't know, maybe Font of Might to make any and all stasis stuff you use deal more damage. Pretty powerful. But let's just go down the list and show what I use on my build, and then maybe it'll help you make proper decisions for your build. This is what I recommend using and what I use, but don't feel like you have to follow it like it's perfect. For example, I use Stasis Siphon because I use a lot of stasis guns to make orbs for myself, and then I use Harmonic Siphon to double down on that, essentially making myself even more orbs, and then obviously Elemental Shards. On top of that, I am using Elemental Time Dilation to make any effects that I give myself via picking up these elemental wells longer, so longer damage buff, for example. I use Powerful Friends, but this is only if you desperately love having that 100 mobility to dodge more often. I recommend it for this build because I'm using Bacchus. However, that's not super necessary. Just what I use. You can replace this with any number of things. Font of Wisdom might be a bit of a spicy choice, but we'll get into that more later when we talk about why I like using Font of Wisdom. However, just getting that slightly faster super regen can just be really nice for scenarios when you just want to get off as many supers as possible. Something that I do find to be almost non-negotiable, though, is recuperation. Now, why recuperation? As I showed you on the helmet, I am running mods that make me make orbs when I'm killing stuff with stasis, and obviously we're going to be using a lot of stasis guns, heavily implied. So why recuperation, though? Well, because I'm regenning my shields and overshields constantly by using stasis shards, I want to be able to also heal myself more effectively by using recuperation. So I'm essentially doubling down on the idea of my HP is constantly regenerating by giving myself another avenue to regenerate that HP. You could use better already, the Void version of this, if you have, say, a Void Elemental Well mod you'd rather be using than, say, any of the solar ones. However, that's kind of personal preference. I just like using recuperation because of the way that it regens my HP, as opposed to my shielding. Now the cloak, if you're a hunter, you should know exactly what's on this cloak already. Utility kickstart, especially with Bacchus. This does work with Bacchus. Some people might try and be like, oh, this doesn't work with Bacchus at all. I hit my dodge and I'm not getting any cooldown back. When the light shift cooldown ends, you do get that chunk of ability energy back. Stare at your hunter dodge when you're using Bacchus. If you have utility kickstart on, you'll dodge. You will not gain any energy back for 10 seconds. And then when that 10 seconds is up, you will get the utility kickstart boost when it's over. I've tested this. I've messed around with it before. Trust me, it does work. And also, as you can see, Font of Might is just really powerful for a build like this where you want to use stasis primaries anyways, or stasis weapons in your kinetic slot, because it just makes them do more damage. And on top of that, you're making tons of stasis wells through elemental shards. Elemental Time Dilation is making that damage buff last longer, so you use it with something like a Reed's Regret, yada yada yada. We'll get into the actual weapon choices here in a second, but those are what I use for all of my armor mods. Personally, you could also drop some of these mods for some more team-based ones, like maybe Supreme Wellmaker or Melee Wellmaker, if you want to be more of a making machine than a stasis shard making machine. You could totally drop off powerful friends if your armor gives you enough mobility as is, in favor of something else that's more useful. This is just what I use and what I like. Feel free to edit to your discretion. Weapons. I mentioned these in the last section, but let's talk about the weapons that I use for this build. First and foremost, it might be shocking, but I actually use Aegir's Scepter with this build. Aegir's Scepter does tons of freezing and slowing, making constant stasis shards for you, giving you so much value, especially if you're using something like, oh, I don't know, Font of Wisdom to make your super come back faster. Using something like Font of Might to make it deal more damage. Do you now understand some of those choices? Using Aegir's Scepter's charge up mode can be very powerful if you're in an encounter where ads don't really group up enough to use Silence and Squall on them, and you're just like, you know what, I just want to do big damage to a big old pile of enemies and just have a really super powered energy weapon for a little bit. Aegir's Scepter can get the job done. You do still probably want to run a primary weapon. You don't really want to run double specials using Aegir's, in my opinion. I just think it's a great choice. However, if you don't have Aegir's Scepter, you don't have it complete, you don't like the idea of using your super, my other highly recommended option is a Chill Clip fusion rifle. Now, as you can see, I love the raid version, and I use one with Demolitionist Chill Clip. I can even show off exactly what I use on it if you want to see exactly how I mod mine. Corkscrew, Enhanced Battery, Demo, Chill Clip. That's what I use. I have a Gambit tracker on it because lol. But the bottom idea is that Demo means that you're just constantly getting tons of grenade energy, and Chill Clip means you're constantly slowing everything and can even freeze stuff, which... Stasis shards. So many stasis shards. But if you didn't do the raid, if you never got to be able to craft a Deliverance, the new fusion rifle from Crucible can roll Chill Clip. It might not be exactly what you want to hear, but if you were a Crucible player or are a Crucible player and you just have one of these kicking around in your vault, you can use that as an option. Energy weapons, the energy slot, you got options. You got some choices. I personally have taken to using Insidious as the weapon in this slot. Believe it or not, trace rifles are kind of close to medium range weapons, so you kind of want medium long range, in my opinion, to compensate when you're doing harder content. So I use Insidious. If you're just trying to shred through enemies, maybe just use an Ikelos. I have my old one here. If you really are feeling dangerous, you could use double special and put on Forbearance there. If you're using, say, the fusion rifle, for example, you could put on Trinity Ghoul and become an ad-clearing monster out there. These are just kind of general ideas and general suggestions. Use what you want. If you're using Bacchus, though, I do recommend it being an arc weapon, just to make good use out of Bacchus. However, that's not required, as you still get a damage boost on slowed targets. Heavies. Listen, let's be real. Everyone knows that Reed's Regret is probably one of the best DPS weapons in the game right now. It works amazing with this build because you're giving it Font of Might. Well, everyone knows how good Reed's is. I want to see what's on mine for what you might want to be searching for. I am using Extended Barrel, Enhanced Battery, Triple Tap Firing Line, and obviously Viced Stinger with a boss spec. Mine's not a fancy Adept version, but boss spec and Adept big ones, I believe, give the same damage boost to bosses. I could be incorrect. If I'm wrong, yell about it down in the comments below. But still, other options, if you don't have a Reed's Regret, or your team is using Gallahorn for DPS, or you're using Gallahorn to burn strike bosses, Palmyra B. It's a solid option. It really is highly recommended. Obviously, Gallahorn is just a good rocket launcher and weapon. It doesn't get the arc weapon boost from Bacchus, or the Font of Might boost for stasis weapons, but it is still very good. You can use Storm Chaser as well. It's a pretty solid weapon. It does get the arc damage boost. It won't get the Font of Might boost, but like I said, it's kind of a trade-off. Which one or the other? Hothead. I don't have a very good Hothead, but I do have one with Impact Casing and Ensemble for just faster reload spam and throwing out rockets constantly. It's a pretty good option. If you have a God Roll Hothead, it works amazing with this build. Highly recommended. So yeah, there you go. That's my stasis build. That's everything that I use for it in every which way imaginable. I believe I showed off every part of the build that I could possibly show off. This is something that I'm probably going to be taking into the new Reprised raid when it launches in about a week after this video comes out. Feel free to copy and use this build for yourself. I think it's wonderful. I think it will probably struggle in certain aspects of the game, but no build is perfect at everything. Highly recommend using it. It has a lot of survivability. Like I said, feel free to shift and edit as you like. Don't feel like you need to take this as a pure 100% guidebook. The only things that I hyper recommend are Dusk Fields boosted by Touch of Winter, Please don't take off Grim Harvest. Use Whispers of Rhyme, use Whispers of Shards, and use Whispers of Durance and Chains. Those are the big recommends from yours truly, the Pseudo Hunter main. Either way, thanks for watching and hanging out. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you maybe get to take something away from this video. Regardless of all that, thank you for watching. Like if you like it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I hope to catch you in the next one.